Look at this rifle. Unusual stock angle, strange internal layout, a silhouette that looks like it came from a different decade than everything around it. This is the AN-94, and if you have spent any time in military forums, gun communities, or just watching footage of Russian forces, you have probably noticed something odd. Almost nobody carries one. Russia officially adopted this rifle in 1994. It passed military trials. Engineers were impressed, and then the Russian army quietly kept using the AK-74 instead. The obvious assumption is that the AN-94 failed, that it broke, that it was too complicated to work. That assumption is wrong. The real story is stranger and more revealing than that. The first thing you notice about the AN-94 is that it looks like it was designed by someone who had never seen a normal rifle. The stock sits at an offset angle. The magazine feeds in at an unusual position. The whole thing has a slightly aggressive, over-engineered appearance, like something built to solve a problem that other rifles were not even trying to address. That appearance is not cosmetic. Every external feature on this rifle is forced by what is happening mechanically inside it. Nothing about the shape is a design statement. The AN-94 looks the way it looks because of its internal mechanism, and that mechanism exists because the Russian military identified a real problem and commissioned an engineer to solve it without compromise. When you understand what the problem actually was, the rifle starts making sense. And when you understand why the army still did not fully adopt it, the story becomes something else entirely. Most people who know the AN-94 by reputation assume the army rejected it because it was unreliable or too complicated to maintain in the field. That is the version that travels fastest online. The narrative writes itself. Russia tries to build a futuristic rifle, overcomplicates it, and soldiers end up preferring the old Kalashnikov because it never jams and never fails. That story is clean, satisfying, and mostly wrong. The AN-94 passed Russian military acceptance trials. It was not rejected at the testing stage. It was not pulled from evaluation because it broke down. It was officially adopted. The complexity argument gets used as a shortcut explanation because it fits the shape of the story people want to tell, but it skips the part that actually matters. The problem was never whether the rifle worked. The problem was what happened after it worked, and what it would take to use it at scale across an entire military. To understand why Russia built this rifle at all, you have to go back to what Soviet and Russian forces learned through Afghanistan and the conflicts that followed through the late 1980s and into the 1990s. The AK platform has real advantages. It fires fast. It stays functional in ugly conditions. It is simple enough that almost anyone can learn to use it, and simple enough that almost anyone can fix it. Those qualities matter enormously when you are equipping hundreds of thousands of soldiers across a massive country with variable training standards and supply chains that do not always reach the front line. But there is a specific problem with the AK that shows up in real combat conditions and does not disappear, no matter how well soldiers train. When you fire a burst, recoil moves the muzzle. The second round goes somewhere different than the first. The third round goes somewhere different again. At close range, this does not matter much. But at longer ranges, or in situations where a soldier needs to put multiple rounds on a target with the first trigger pull, the AK's recoil behavior becomes a real limitation. Individual hit probability, not calm range accuracy but actual field accuracy under stress, in movement, under fire, in bad visibility, was lower than Russian military planners wanted. They could train around it to some degree, but training has limits. If you wanted to close the gap between what soldiers could do and what the doctrine required, you needed the rifle itself to help. So the military commissioned a solution. Gennadiy Nikonov was the engineer who built that solution. The AN-94 fires its first 2 rounds at approximately 1,800 rounds per minute. That rate is so fast that the second round exits the barrel before the shooter's body has had time to register the recoil from the first shot. This is not a marginal improvement. At that cyclic rate, the 2 rounds are effectively leaving the muzzle as a pair before any muzzle movement has occurred. The mechanism that makes this possible is called the blowback shifted pulse system. In a standard rifle, the bolt cycles immediately as the round fires, and the recoil energy begins transferring to the shooter's body right away. In the AN-94, the barrel and the chamber move rearward together inside the receiver before the bolt begins to cycle. The recoil energy is absorbed into that internal rearward movement and delayed long enough for both rounds to exit before the muzzle has climbed. The result is 2 rounds landing in almost the same point of impact. In documented testing, the accuracy improvement during burst fire was measurable and significant. Engineers could see it on paper. Evaluators could see it on targets. The rifle did exactly what Nikonov designed it to do. This was not theoretical. The AN-94 worked, which makes what happened next harder to explain on the surface, and easier to understand once you look at what the Army would have actually needed to do to use it. The AN-94 does not work like an AK. That sentence sounds simple, but it carries enormous consequences inside a military institution. The manual of arms is different. The way you hold it, the way you handle the controls, the sequence you follow when something goes wrong, all of it differs from what soldiers trained on AKs already know. Maintenance procedures are different. Disassembly is different. Armorers who spent careers learning the Kalashnikov platform would need retraining on a mechanism that operates on entirely different principles. Spare parts would need a separate logistics chain. The manufacturing tolerances required for the AN-94's internal system are significantly tighter than what AK production demands, which means each unit costs more to produce and requires more precision at the factory level. Now, place all of that inside the Russian military of the 1990s. A military absorbing the collapse of the Soviet Union. A military dealing with severe budget constraints, shrinking procurement funds, and an institutional structure under serious strain. A military sitting on enormous stockpiles of AK-74s, functional, familiar, logistically supported rifles that worked, and that everyone already knew how to use. Replacing the AK-74 with the AN-94 was not a choice between 2 rifles. It was a choice about whether to rebuild an entire military support ecosystem, training doctrine, armorer pipelines, spare parts chains, manufacturing capacity, around a new platform that offered real but specific improvements in a limited set of combat scenarios. The rifle was better at what it was designed to do. But better in specific ways is not the same as better enough to justify dismantling a system that had been functioning for decades. Russia officially adopted the AN-94 in 1994. That fact gets repeated often in discussions about the rifle, usually to make the story more dramatic. But official adoption in Russian military procurement does not mean universal issue. It means the weapon has been evaluated, accepted, and cleared for purchase. Whether it actually gets purchased, and in what quantities, and for which units, depends on budget, priority, and the institutional will to move forward. What actually happened after adoption was limited fielding. Some Spetsnaz elements received the AN-94. Certain interior ministry units acquired small numbers. The rifle appeared in the hands of specialized forces in photographs from the late 1990s and early 2000s. But the AK-74M remained the standard service rifle for the overwhelming majority of Russian ground forces. The gap between what the adoption paperwork said and what soldiers were actually carrying was enormous. The AN-94 existed on paper as the current next-generation platform, while living in practice as a niche weapon that most of the army would never encounter. Then came the First and Second Chechen Wars. Russian forces operating in urban environments, in close quarters, in the chaotic and unpredictable conditions of city fighting, reached for what they already knew. The AN-94's mechanical complexity, which was manageable under controlled conditions with properly trained operators, became a real concern when units were operating under pressure without the support infrastructure the rifle needed. Soldiers and commanders who had trained on Kalashnikovs were not going to switch platforms in the middle of an active conflict. The limited fielding that had already happened did not build momentum toward wider adoption. It revealed the ceiling. The rifle was technically the official next-generation standard, while the Army's actual behavior, what soldiers carried, what commanders requested, what logistics units stocked, told a completely different story. The AK-12 program eventually emerged as Russia's genuine attempt at a next-generation service rifle, drawing from a different set of lessons and a different institutional moment. The AN-94 did not get officially canceled with a public announcement. There was no dramatic failure, no high-profile rejection, no moment of decisive condemnation. The rifle simply ran out of road. Procurement stayed minimal. Attention shifted. The AN-94 became a historical artifact, while still technically remaining in the inventory. Some units likely still hold examples today, but the window when it might have become the standard Russian service rifle closed quietly, without ceremony. What is interesting is where the AN-94's reputation actually grew largest, not inside the Russian military. Outside it, in gun communities, in military enthusiast forums, in video games where its distinctive silhouette and unusual mechanism made it a recognizable and exotic choice, the AN-94 developed a reputation as the rifle that was too advanced for the army that built it. That framing is appealing. It has the shape of a good story, but it is not quite accurate. The Russian army did not refuse the AN-94 because it could not handle an advanced weapon. The Russian army failed to fully commit to the AN-94 because committing to it meant committing to everything the rifle required around it: the training overhaul, the logistics rebuild, the manufacturing retooling, the institutional shift. And at the moment that decision had to be made, the cost of that commitment was higher than the benefit the rifle offered over what already existed. That is not a failure of vision. It is a calculation that militaries make constantly, usually correctly, and almost never discuss openly. The mechanism inside the AN-94 is genuinely unusual. The blowback shifted pulse system remains one of the more creative engineering solutions to the recoil problem in small arms history. The accuracy improvement it delivered in burst fire was real and documented. Nikonov solved the problem he was given. The rifle works, and the army that commissioned it looked at everything a working rifle actually requires to function across hundreds of thousands of soldiers in dozens of environments with a single logistics chain, and decided the old answer was still close enough to good enough. Look at that offset stock one more time. Look at the way the receiver sits. Look at the magazine angle. None of that is accidental. None of it is style. Every external feature on the AN-94 is the visible result of an internal engineering decision made to solve a specific problem in a specific way. The rifle is a physical record of what Russia identified as a tactical gap, what one engineer built to close it, and what the institution around that engineer was not prepared to absorb. The most advanced tool in the room changes nothing if the system around it will not move. Armies have understood this for as long as armies have existed. The AN-94 did not teach them that lesson. It just became one of the clearest examples of what that lesson looks like when it is built from metal and polymer and left sitting in a limited inventory, officially adopted, practically forgotten, and still the most mechanically interesting service rifle Russia ever commissioned. If this kind of breakdown is what you come here for, the real reason behind the strange military detail, not the version that travels fastest online, subscribe. There is more coming.